Hello and welcome to Drunk on Tea. Many older gamers remember the classic paint set from 2nd edition 40k and 4th edition Fantasy, and the monopose Space Marine and Chaos Warrior that came with it. While digging through my collection of old minis, I found a load of these classic Chaos Warriors that used to fill up the tables of games in the 90s, so today I thought I'd paint a classic mini, but with a more modern style. As I have so many of these minis, if you would like, I could try painting one using the original guide that came with the paint set, especially as I have some of these paints still, and the Warpaints Nostalgia 94 set, so I could try and replicate the original scheme. Let me know in the comments below if you'd like to see that. The first thing I've done is prime the model black, so I've got a nice smooth, even base coat to work from, a modern change from the white that minis had to be primed in. First, with Abaddon Black, I'm going to paint the entire model. It may seem odd to paint black over the black primer, but this paint has a different finish to that of the Rattlecan Chaos Black, so by painting with a layer of Abaddon Black, I can get an even finish to the mini, and if I make any mistakes later, it will be easier to tidy up, especially as instead of the classic red, I'm going for a black Chaos Warrior. After a layer of Abaddon Black, I've got an even finish to the mini. Now with Eshin Grey, I'm applying a dry brush all over the miniature. I don't want to be too heavy with this dry brush as I don't want the model to look grey, but I want to catch all of the edges with a bit of this grey. There are a lot of sharp edges to the armour and details on this classic sculpt, so this dry brush will pick out all of the detail and really save time highlighting all of the armour. To make sure I'm not being too heavy, I'm just lightly running my brush past the raised details on the model, so just a small amount of the paint is deposited onto the mini. Some will no doubt also catch onto large flat areas, and this is okay, as long as it's light, as it will add some extra definition to the model. After that dry brush, you can see how it's picked out all of the details. Now with Mechanica Standard Grey, I'm applying another lighter dry brush all over the mini. I'm applying even less pressure to the brush this time and just very lightly catching all of the raised areas of the model to add a little bit of this slightly lighter grey. I'm still leaving a lot of the Eshin Grey showing, but this second dry brush will bring out a few more details and add to the definition from the first dry brush. Now with Dawnstone, I'm applying a final really light dry brush, focusing on brushing from the top down on the model, so the most upwards facing areas will get a light highlight, giving the effect of light catching the armour. If you go too heavy with this dry brush, the armour will look grey, so make sure you're being very light and working in a downwards motion to just give a final highlight to the armour. With the Dawnstone applied, the armour looks a bit messy, but as I paint in other details, it will start to look like sharp black armour. With some Khorne Red, I'm painting in a couple of details, like the inside of these horn style details on the helmet. This is almost a colour swap of the original, where the armour was red and these areas were painted black. I'm being careful to only paint the inside of these details, keeping my brush under control so I don't accidentally paint over the black I've already highlighted. But mistakes can be tidied up by painting with Abaddon Black again and a gentle dry brush over any edges. I'm also painting the strapping on the axe with Khorne Red as well. This may take a couple of layers to get solid coverage, but painting the helmet details and the axe handle red will add a pop of colour to the mini, while also giving a nod to the classic red era paint scheme of the past. With the red applied, the model already has a Chaos Warrior look. Now with Mournfang Brown, I'm painting the gloves. With these older models, the details aren't always too defined, and it can be difficult to work out what's glove and what's armour. But I'm picking a point that's around where the glove should start and painting the rest in with Mournfang Brown. As always, I'm being careful around other details and painting in a couple of thin layers until I get a solid coat of brown. By using brown for these, it will give the impression of leather gloves, as well as breaking up that black just a little bit. I'm also catching the boots with some Mournfang Brown, so this Chaos Warrior has leather boots to match his gloves. Next with Avalan Sunset, I'm painting the skulls on his armour. I'm using yellow for this as a little throwback to the old way of painting, Where gold was often painted yellow, just think of the 2nd edition ultramarines with their yellow shoulder pad trim and aquillas. Luckily, modern paints have better coverage, so these details should have a solid cover of yellow in just a few coats, not the 10 or so it would have taken to paint yellow over black with the original paints. With the yellow and brown painted, there's just one base coat left to apply. And that's with some lead belcher. I'm painting all of the metal details. There is some chainmail that I'm going to paint. These old models are simple and don't require a lot of colours to paint, and there is a real charm to them. Maybe it's nostalgia, but I don't think every mini needs to be crammed full of detail and come in 100 bits on the sprue. These single piece models worked just fine for gaming pieces, and even if some of the details are a bit flat, like you can see how this chainmail doesn't really have much of the chain look to it. I'm also painting all of the other details on the axe, so this part at the bottom of the handle, and all over the head of the axe, painting all of these with a couple of layers of lead belcher. With the metallics painted, that's all of the base coats, so now it's time to apply some shades. First, with known oil, I'm shading all over the areas I painted with lead belcher, as well as the handle to the axe. I'm going to leave the red in the helmet details alone, as that's dark enough already. I'm also making sure I shade the chainmail as well, to add as much definition as possible. Now with Agrak's Earth shade, I'm shading the gloves, boots and yellow skulls. This will add some definition to these areas and make the highlights more impactful. If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. And if you'd like to support the channel, please become a member by pressing the join button down below or joining me over on Patreon. After the shades have dried, you can see how they've brought out details, and now it's time to apply some highlights. Starting with Evil Sun Scarlet, I'm carefully picking out the raised details on the axe handle. I'm keeping these highlights quite small and just catching the top edge of the ridges, so some of the corn red will show through, and the shade from the recesses. I'm not going too bright with these highlights, but if you wanted a starker highlight, Wild Rider Red would also work for this. It will just be even more contrasting to the darker red. With the handle highlighted, next I'm going to highlight the leather. So starting with more Van Brown again, I'm applying this to all of the areas the shade didn't settle. So wherever the Agrak's Earth shade is in a recess, I'm leaving the shade, but painting on either side with Mournfang Brown to bring it back to colour. By doing this, I can bring out as much detail on these areas as possible by having the darkened down shaded Mournfang Brown and pure Mournfang Brown showing, which when I add the final highlight will really bring out all of the details on these areas. I'm doing the same on the boots as well, keeping the paint under control and only applying it in areas that the shade didn't settle, but making sure I bring all of these areas back up to their brighter colour. The Mournfang Brown has brought the leather back up to colour. Now with Scrag Brown, I'm applying a small highlight to all of the edges and raised details to the leather. I'm picking out any creases and folds as well as the knuckles to the fingers, keeping these lines nice and small and just catching the very edges with a small highlight. I'm doing the same to the boots as well, applying a thin highlight to the edges of all of the details like the boot tops, as well as any creases or folds in the boot, catching all of these details with some Scrag Brown. With the leather highlighted, this Chaos Warrior is almost complete. With some Uriel Yellow, I'm going to highlight the skulls. As these are small areas, I'm just applying some spot highlights to any raised details, like the areas around the eye sockets and the jawline, as well as the top of the skull. Just a few select spot highlights should be enough for these details. With the skulls highlighted, all that's left to highlight are the metallics, and I'm using Stormhose Silver for this. On the chainmail, I'm applying some spots of Stormhose Silver to any raised details I can see. I don't want to be too heavy with this, just a few spots will give the impression of light catching the chainmail. I'm also catching the bolts or rivets on the axe with a small spot of Stormhose Silver, and I'm catching all of the edges to the axe as well. For the sharp points, I'm using the side of my brush to get a nice even highlight, but for others I use the tip of my brush to get a nice small highlight. I'm just making sure that all of the edges to the metal details get a highlight of Stormhost silver. And with the metal highlighted, that is my updated paint scheme to a classic model, but with some nods to the paint schemes of the past. Let me know in the comments below, do you have fond memories of these old Chaos Warriors? And would you like to see me paint one using the original guide and colours? Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe for more hobby content, both modern and classic. And happy painting!